All right. So if you want to go ahead and open up your Bibles, you think you know where we're at. We're in Romans chapter 12. We're looking at the transitional chapter that moves us into from the theological, doctrinal teachings that was so hard to kind of comprehend. And it's like he's now bringing it to the point of, after he's discussed on how justification occurs, God's plan of redemption, and some of those complex things that seem very technical, he moves to this beautiful section now. And it's real personal now. Now it becomes a point where Paul is helping us to understand how we need to be living before him. And this last section, verses 9 to 21, it's unique to me because there's two groupings of this section divided. And I'm going to kind of call it the kind of internal and external. He starts out the first three verses talking about, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 4 verses, he talks about internal. And I mean internal as far as like the church, Christians, one another, how we view one in each. And then the last part, from 14 on, the rest of the chapter, it's looking at love external, how we interact in the world and such. So let's go ahead and read 9 through 13. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. And seek to show hospitality. So it's interesting, he talks about love in this and uses different words for love. You know, we really got to do something with that English word love. And it's not like the Greeks. You know, we always talk about this. You hear me talk about it on how many different words precisely they describe an affectionate feeling towards another. You have in the Greek brotherly love, Philadelphia. You have one that's an excited love, that's like grasping on, the eros. You have agape love, which is care for everybody, and in not an emotional way. Then you have one that is described as being for family, and it's a unique type of love that you have in your family, right? Our family's weird. You know, our family's, it's unique. There's a different relationship. What do they say about blood? It's always thicker than water. I remember Suzanne, when we got married, one of the things that I believe it, was concerned was, am I a mama's boy? You know, and genuinely, it's a concern, is that, whose side are you going to take? You know, I mean, kind of that idea that, am I embarrassing you? Okay. I've already embarrassed her so much, it doesn't bother her anymore. But it's kind of that idea that, are you going to, is she almost, I think you even said it that way, was, you know, well, blood is thicker than water. Your mom and you are closer, and so if it comes between me, you, and your mama, I'm not going to be it. It's probably going to be you and your mama. And I'm like, no, I had to convince her that it's not that way. But that is true when it comes to family relationships and that type of feeling we have for one another. So that's something that I want us to discuss, because when he says love here in the very first words, let me get over there where I'm at. Okay. He uses a different word when he says about genuine. And what it is actually other translations, and if you go to the Greek, it's the same thing in a way. That's what I mean about why I wanted to read one translation and then this one, because they're both accurate. But they kind of, I like the hypocrisy because it's like hypocrite. Now, hypocrite comes from a Greek word and concept where the actors would get on stage, and they didn't have costumes, and they didn't have all these different makeup stuff, so what would they do? They had a mask on a stick, and it would express something on that. And whenever they were angry, they would put that on, and it was a face. And then when they were happy, they would change and put this one on. It was angry with flaming, and put another mask up, and put it over, and they would talk through that mask. Well, that is a hypocrite. You get it? A mask. You're speaking through a mask. And so that's a great word. It's kind of neat because, isn't that kind of what a hypocrite is? Without hypocrisy is what he says. nothing. You're genuine. And that's why I say about these translations. But this love is one that's agape. So he's saying that our love and affection, not based on emotion. It's not stirred by emotion. Whenever I think of you, my first thought a lot of times isn't agape. It may be a more emotional relationship that I have built with each one of you in a different way. Agape is the one in which I will always want the best for you, whether I like it or not, whether you like it or not. I'm going to give you my best all the time. Well, that's a great philosophy, and that's a great one that we need to have as God, but we know there's more real emotions in us. And so, but he starts with that one. And then he says something the opposite. It's almost like he said, abhor. This word here in the Greek is to be horrified by something, to hate. And you think, he's telling you to love and then turn around and hate. I thought we're not supposed to hate. I thought you're supposed to love everybody. Well, what's interesting is the idea that really God does love, but he also hates, doesn't he? He does. There are some things that he hates, and we could have listed them up there. But why is it? It's because of the damage and what it inflicts upon our love. Is those things that will harm the things that are valuable to God, his children, the innocent, the vulnerable, all those things that would harm them and come in, God hates. He hates sin. He abhors it. Why? Because of what it does to his children, what it has done, and all the things that it's inflicted upon his children. He hates it. He says that's what we should be. We should love without hypocrisy, be genuine, agape love for everyone. But we need to hate the things that God hates, the things that God sees that are harmful to the righteousness and to those things that are going to hurt spiritually his and those that we care about. So he doesn't say hate people. We got to really kind of clarify this, because that sometimes we look at an evil person and we hate them as a person. And we have to be careful with that, because if we do that, then God can put that on us and he would have never sent his son. Because we were evil people. Before we come to Christ, everybody honestly is evil. If you're in sin, you're evil. Because you're against Christ. You're an adversary. That's what evil means, an enemy of God's. And he still showed us agape, but he hated what the sin was doing to his children. He didn't hate us as people individually. We were still his children. So we have to be able to he says, start with that. And then he says, hold fast to what is good. Now this is what's really interesting, is how he says to hold fast. The NIV, or the NET that I was talking about, says cling. You ever seen, like, cat hair? Seems to cling to my clothes. I tell you, I got one shirt that I swear is something to grab lint. Every time, no matter how fast I get it out of the dryer, man, there is cat hair on it. All the time. It just clings to it. I can shake it off and it still seems to be there. Well, that word in the Greek is cleave, join, and to bind, like glue to. You know where else that's used? In Matthew 19, when Jesus is talking about marriage. And he says that a man is to depart from his mother and father and to cling to his wife. That's the only other time that it's used in the Greek. If you go over to the Hebrew, it's the one in creation. So it's not just grab onto something and hold it, but as a married couple should have with one another. He says that's what you need to do, to what is good. And now he goes love again, but now he says love one another with a brotherly. There's a couple of words that are combined here. Strogios is the word for familiar love that you'll see. When you take Philadelphia, which is brotherly, it's Philadelphia, it's brotherly. And in this verse, it's kind of interesting, depending on translation, because one will say brotherly love, or honoring one another, but the love that's mutual, he says, being devoted, this is the type of a brotherly, familiar love. So it's a combination, and I'm not a Greek scholar, and I feel really out of my league. But I like it. I thought it was really neat and helped me to understand this. When he's describing this, he's talking about the power of a brotherly type of love that's family, that's tight. Again, this is another unique word, and it's Philostrogos. Philostrogos. And you never see this word like that again. It's Philadelphia, brotherly, or strogos in family love. This one that he's talking about here is a brotherly, familiar love. He's talking to us. So he says that we not only should have an agape care for one another. That's fine. You know, we can do that without emotion. I know I have. I'm sorry. I just have to care for you. You know, I'm sorry. I just, you know, I can't be mad. I want the best for you. But it doesn't mean I have an emotion to it. But now he notches it up. And he says, no. He says, you need to have this brotherly, familiar love. Now we're getting more caring and emotional with our feelings towards one another. This is going to help us when we start to look at the outside relationship with the world. If we can't do this within, we cannot handle the external world. And that's why he starts, I think, with this and looking at us and one another as far as Christians in the body. Notice that the first part of this chapter, he started out by talking about the body individually, talking about our talents and how we bring it together and what we're supposed to do for one another and the many members in one body. And now, he says now individually of that body, talking about our love and our relationship with one another. And then in the second part of this chapter, we're going to look at how we handle the world. What does the world do? So we have that type of brotherly love. I like one translation that says, you know, in this one, it's outdo one another in showing honor. It's kind of neat the way it's said because it's kind of like competition. You can't out-honor me. I'm going to out-honor you. I'm going to honor you beyond what you could ever, I'm going to one-up you on honor. I don't know, it's kind of sounds silly because it sounds like, oh, you shouldn't be that way. You shouldn't compete like that. That's just not right. But if it's this, in that, Nate, you may show me honor. Guess what? I'm going to show you more. You're going to show me more honor? I'm going to show you more honor. I'm going to over-honor you more than you can ever honor me. Can you imagine if we really could accomplish that? If people were constantly trying to over-honor you beyond themselves, that you were constantly and I'm not saying like keeping a track or like a sporting game, but if we had that mindset to one another in the church, how many problems would be solved among congregations? If we could go beyond just saying, I have to care for you, agape you, to where we looked at one another and said, you are my brother, you are my family member in love with you. And that I was always giving you honor more than I honor myself. I tell you what, all the problems I've ever heard in others and throughout my life, in conflict in churches, this has failed, hasn't it? This is what breaks down. If we could accomplish just these verses, a church would never see conflict. Now, if a conflict is going on in a church, it's also going to affect the outside. Because people will find out, they'll be able to see us as well. And so, outdo one another. And not trying to show off and say, look, I've got 5, she's only got 2. I'm up on you. But it's that competition within our spirit to continually be focused on honoring others. This is interesting. How can you be slothful and zeal? You know, it just seems like something to me when he says don't be slothful. It's lazy, isn't it? You know, whenever we think about that. Now, in the New English translation says, don't lag in zeal. Can you see how the word lag, in the way that they're using it, if you go, and I'm pulling up the Greek concordance right now, the adverb is slothful. So I'm kind of teaching another thing, is that how you can get and understand by using 2 good translations and get and pull stuff through it. Slothful, we can see a sloth. We know what that means. If I just say lag, it doesn't have quite the connotation. But the 2 together give me that idea of how powerful this is saying is, don't lag in zeal. So what's zeal? When we talk about zeal in our lives, and what are we supposed to be? And the Greek word is speed, dispatch, eagerness. Don't be slow to be fast. That's what it's saying. Don't be slothful, be fast. Don't be slothful in your zeal. Don't be slow in your quickness. If you just took the Greek meanings. So isn't that an interesting phrase, the way that he's using this? In other words, it takes me a while before I finally get fired up. Kind of like my old truck before I put it with fuel injection. I'd sit there and pump, 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 and it'd start and it'd just sit there. And I'd have to wait for 10 minutes for it to warm up. And man, once it warmed up though, boy, that baby would take off. Now I've got fuel injection in it. Man, it is not slothful about zeal. Boom, it fires up. I think that's interesting because you see sometimes people who are slow to get excited. They're slow to react. And that hesitation sometimes is dangerous, especially in our personal relationships. If I'm slow in responding to your needs, then that allows opportunity for that person to either be injured or lose faith or not have that instant connection to help hold us tight. So I thought that was another one. Fervent in spirit. Now this is it tied together because it's in service to the Lord. Fervent is fire, fever, on fire. We find that as a description sometimes of the apostles when they're fervent in spirit as they stood before a council. They were on fire. They were excited about it. They weren't, Jesus is the Lord. He's the Christ who came down from heaven. They're on fire. Sometimes you've seen people that when they're teaching, it just takes the air out of the room because it's just kind of like, and it's like, you're not excited about this? This is not getting you on fire? You know what I mean? Sometimes I feel like I go too crazy the other direction. I get too excited, but I have to pull myself back. And I'm not saying that I'm fervent in spirit, but I hope you understand that. But look at what the focus is here. This is what's neat. Service to the Lord. So what's that? What is your service to the Lord? He just told us at the beginning of this chapter. If it's in generosity, in giving. If it's in teaching, teach. That is our service to the Lord. If it's in ministering, minister. That's our service. And what does he say to do? Do it with zeal. Do it with fever, with fervent energy. Not just duh. And then when the next part he says about this is rejoicing in hope. Why would he say that? Well, because there's a lot of people that go, yeah, I know, I'm not supposed to worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's got enough to worry about. And they're not real excited about it. It's like, my hope is based on what God teaches me, and I know that I'm going to go to heaven. I know I got my sins forgiven, and my hope, and all that. And it's like, no, be happy about it. The Lord is on your side. Who cares who's against you? Should that not excite us? My sins are forgiven. Rejoice in my hope. The Lord will deliver me. Rejoice in the hope of what God has told us. Don't just put it as a reference point that I can look at and go, yeah, he did say that. But rejoice in what the Lord has told us and that what we know it's about. Man, patience in tribulations is tough. When you're the one that's hurting, it's easy for me to tell you. It's easy to tell you. Yeah, just be patient. It's okay. You'll get through this. But what about when it's us? When we're hurting, when you've got that headache, when you've got this problem in your life, it's hard. You see, impatience also creates possibly the wrong action. Sometimes, especially under duress, you see that happen. People that are under duress and something's going on and they act too quick. And they're not. This ties, I think, with what he just said and saying, rejoice about hope. If you're rejoicing about hope, then you understand what tribulations is all about. Because James talks about it, about the effect, the positive things that can occur and can help us in enduring tribulation. So be patient. All these are for us. These are practical things that help us before we can go outward into the world and engage. And that's what we're going to move to and see. And of course, you know, this is one that we looked in Ephesians chapter 6. We were talking about it in our Bible class, how that he listed the armor of God, the breastplate, the sword, the helmet, the shoes, the belt that pulls us together. And then I have always seen these little graphics of a man with his sword, and kids love to draw them. They love to make these little, sword, shield, helmet, breastplate, and all that. But I've never seen one that showed prayer. But it's listed there. How do you draw the weapon prayer? How do you put that in your body of armor? But in Ephesians, the last part, he says, prayer. Paul says here, prayer, constant. I think that's something that I know I need to work on too. Contributing to the needs of the saints. Remember, he's talking about all of us. We need to look at one another and showing that and being ready. And just imagine all the things we just listed there. If you're not fervent in prayer, if you're not rejoicing in hope, if you're not patient in tribulation, and you're not constantly in prayer, how are you going to help others? How are you going to help? And that's what I sometimes see. People that are so stifled in their own life that they don't look beyond and they don't see somebody and they don't take care of those around them. Now, I think this is not just physical, it's everything. Whatever your need may be, he's talking about that. The next part is show hospitality. Now, what is interesting is this Greek word really does have the root in strangers. It's not just saying, open up a hospitality room and have everybody come over, because we think of entertainment in hospitality. In the ancient Asian customs and stuff that still go on in some remote areas, hospitality was something extremely powerful. I mean, if you offered an extended hospitality and it was to strangers that they would offer this to, it meant your life for their life. If it meant you had to die in order to protect them, that's what you did. And that's what we see with Lot. Remember the angels? The same thing. That was a hospitality to strangers. So that is something else that's very important. So now, if we got all this down, the next part of 12, now he starts to look at our engagement and reactions in the world. And so now let's go ahead and read 14 through 18. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. So, that's a lot. These are some hard thoughts, especially when we look around in the world, and we are the ones that are, again, being inflicted by some of the things that happen to us. But when he starts right out, he not only just says, don't curse your enemy, but he says, bless them. When do you bless them? All the time. How many, honestly, if we were to ask, and you were able to ask honest, you could respond honestly, would you give me the right answer that you were blessing your enemies? I don't know. I think a lot of us would struggle to say, yeah, part of my prayer is to bless my enemies. Really? Are you being honest? That you could seriously say, yeah, I bless my enemies. I bring upon a blessing upon them. I want them to be blessed by God. I know I'm weak in this, because when I look at those people, you know what I see? I see something very personal. I see the world. Again, I see the sinner, and I don't see the soul. And I forget about that. That's why it's so imperative that we are able to learn to love and work among ourselves and show that type of brotherly love and with each other, because then if we can't do that within, we're never going to be able to handle the world. And this, again, is our influence in the world that makes a difference. That's what we're here to do. Not just protect ourselves in isolation, but to be in the world and shining our light. And our shining our light is doing these things. Bless those who persecute you. What does that do when you bless somebody? It starts to reframe the way you look at your enemies. It doesn't mean it makes them right. It doesn't forgive them. But it changes the way we start to look at them. Which then, if they do come around to being on our side, which ultimately should be God's side, it's a whole lot easier. A lot of times you miss clues. You ever miss clues sometimes? People say things. I do that sometimes. You know, I'll be around some people and, you know, they'll be saying things and I just miss it. I don't see it coming. And I think that's what happens sometimes because, you know, we don't want them to be receptive. And if we are not blessing our enemies, then it changes the way we're receptive and seeing people when they're ready. Because I just want to push you and keep you at an arm's distance to begin with. But if I'm blessing you, then when I see something good in you starting to happen, I'm more in tune with wanting to help bring you to the Lord. And isn't that what we're to do? Bring God's enemies to him? So, not only not to curse them, but he says, and these are the people that are attacking you. Now, I'm going to bring up a really it sounds kind of weird, but I still think this is also an overlap in the church. Have you been persecuted by somebody in the church? Well, I bet you probably say, well, no. Well, what about somebody that's been antagonistic? You know, there's been times and disruptions where sometimes the very people that we care about, even our own family, can be the most difficult to be with and can be the ones that are like very adversarial towards you. And not necessarily as a persecutor, we wouldn't label them that way, but that's what they're kind of doing in the way that they may be responding and treating you and things. But we also need to look internally about those that we feel are coming against us or are in adversarial relationships as well, is bless them as well. And rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. You know, it's really easy to weep with those who weep. You say, well, and it's harder to rejoice with those who are rejoicing. And you wonder, well, no, that's not really right. Well, there's a fundamental, and I'm taking this down to a very simplistic level in a way. And an illustration might be somebody at work, you know, there's promotions going on at your work, and then all of a sudden you hear everybody there gets a pay raise, gets promotions, but you. And they're all happy and rejoicing. Are you? Are you going to be? Can you really honestly rejoice with them when you don't get it? What about when somebody is blessed with maybe a brand new vehicle that's just amazing and you're driving what you're driving? Yeah, I'm real happy. I'm going to rejoice with you over that. So sometimes what I'm talking about here is like a little bit of jealousy. Sometimes we have to be careful about. But rejoicing means we're empathetic and sympathetic. Both understanding what they're going through, empathetic, I understand what you're going through, but sympathetic is a little more emotional, where we start to imply that, but that I can truly be happy for everyone when they're rejoicing and share with them and relate with them. And that, again, is looking to those also in the world, to be with them, to see that. Now, living in harmony with one another sounds easy again, but we know that a lot of times it is very, very difficult for us to be in sync. And that's what that harmony means in a harmonic type of balance where we're with one another. Why does he have to tell us not to be haughty, but associate with the lowly? Well, you know what? We have a real problem, I don't care who you are, with thinking our worth is greater than it is. And sometimes there are people that we don't really want to hang out with because we just don't think they're as the same caliber. Now, I know I'm saying it and it sounds like, well, that's just really ridiculous. It's not. No, it does. There are some levels to where, whether we have the same taste in music, food, hobbies, whatever it might be, sometimes, you know, we just look down. We think, well, they're different, and we will associate with those who we feel are at our level. And it may be very sublime, the way that this may occur. But what he's trying to do is to break the barrier And among these as well, these churches he's talking about is looking at both those that are in power in the world and those who are washing dishes and sweeping the streets. Because people tend to want to talk to the guy who's in power, the owner of a business, versus the guy who's washing dishes. So we have to be careful about that as well. And that's also a good one for in the church, not to be. But to associate with the lowly, don't pull yourself away, because they're both valuable and they're loved by God. Don't be wise in your own sight. And that is interesting, because there is a certain level that I feel like, well, I have to use wisdom. I need to understand it, but who am I dependent upon to be wise? Sometimes it's the information in which I've accumulated. It's subjective. It's not something that's based on fact or God's word. And I believe that I'm wise about these things. There's a lot of people who think that they're experts in certain things, and yet they're really not. There's always somebody smarter than you, by the way, right? There's always somebody dumber than you. Sometimes I think I'm the smartest person in the room on a certain topic. Somebody else will walk in, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, boy, I don't know anything about that. But I've seen people that try to hold on to that. They'll say, no, I know everything. I have this. You're not. Don't do that. What you'll find is if you don't consider yourself the wisest person, is that you will end up being the wisest person, because you have that humility. Your wisdom will come out because you don't have to force people to think of you as being wise. And it's in your sight. That's the other thing I think is a lot of times nobody else sees us that way, but we see ourselves as being that way. So let's go ahead and read 19 through 21. And we're going to group this together because this is another very difficult thing, but it's a great strategy on what is so emotional and passionate when we deal with conflict. Starting in 19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So why should we not avenge ourselves? Who's going to do it for me? Sometimes we feel like that, if I don't do it, nobody cares. And so we want to take it. And, there's a part that when you can strike back, there's a level that feels good. Vengeance, getting even, watching somebody, you being able to take it in your own hands and get at somebody. Because you feel like if you don't, then that empowers your enemy, that somehow I need to avenge. And the problem is we don't know all sides of the story sometimes. There's a lot, you know what they always say about the truth? Especially when it's in the social settings, there's 3 sides to every story. There's your story, your side, their side, and then the truth. That's the problem, and a lot of times the things that we are being attacked with or wronged about, I've seen a lot of times where that's not what the person was saying. You've taken this wrong. You didn't understand the context in which they were saying it, or you heard it through another person. And if you were to just go talk to that person and square it away, you'd find out, oh, well, that's not what they said. No, we get offended. And then what do? We want to avenge. And so we'll say something nasty about that person. We'll start to come back at them somehow. And that's where we get in trouble. Now, in this level, maybe it shows an intensity of maybe a physical injury or something more tragic that occurs to us. But the wrath of God is the judgment of God. I mean, can you get somebody better than God? The problem is he's not on my schedule. He's not on my timeline. I want it now. And I don't know when he does it. He doesn't send me a notification. The legal system now has victims advocates in the district attorney's office for victims. And what their job is to let the victim's family members and the victim know what's going on so they can be aware of what's the legal process happening and all that's happening. And they did that when my brother was murdered. They brought us in and they explained everything and told us what was going to happen. They kept us very informed. Well, God doesn't operate that way. He doesn't let us know exactly the inside of, well, Ron, this is what I'm going to do to him. I'm going to have him lose his job, and then he's going to experience this problem and this problem. No. We would love that, wouldn't we? If God would just tell us how he's avenging for us, it would just somehow feel better. Let it go. Quit allowing the emotional energy to be taken up by that. And just understand that it's God who's going to handle it for you. That's your hope. That's where you rejoice in your hope, what he talked about earlier, is understanding that God will take care of it. But he not only gives you this philosophical idea that don't take out vengeance. Vengeance, God says, is mine, and this is a quote from the Old Testament. But he gives us a process of how, and the opposite of what we should do. He first says, if they're hungry, do what? Let them starve. They don't deserve to eat. No, the opposite. Feed them. If they're thirsty, give them muddy water. No, give them the best water you can give them. This is the opposite of what the world responds. The opposite of what evil does. Evil will not feed you and will not make sure you're taken care of. That's exactly the natural response in an evil world. And they expect that from each other. If I'm going to do that to you, I expect you to do it to me. Don't give me food because I'm not going to give it to you. That's the way the world is, and that's evil. But goodness and God rains down upon the entire world. Good, evil, the same. He rains on evil and good. He blesses us all. And that's what we have to look at. And this is a process, a formula for destroying your enemies. And it's not destroying them by starving them to death, letting them die of dehydration, but you're going to kill them with kindness. You heard that. You kill them with kindness. You destroy that enemy. And so he says, if anything, what is it going to do? He says, give them something to drink. And what's going to be the result? It's very beautiful. It's positive. It's not as emotionally intense. You know, for me to not give you bread and to sit there and watch you starve to death, whether you like it or not, there may be a little bit of you going, oh man, it feels so good to watch them suffer. But it's so cancerous. It's cancerous, and it's negative spiritual effect on us. But when we actually are positive against an evil, negative world, we remain undefiled spiritually and more powerful. And the effect is the most powerful than you taking vengeance yourself. It's to show them the opposite, demonstrate to them. And so he gives them this idea of that it's the same type of process, and the result would be like putting heaps of coal on their head. You know, I heard one guy say, yeah, but the coal isn't hot enough. You know, that's what we want. Yeah, let's talk about the coal. Let's talk about burning their heads. That's not what he's talking about. The effectiveness, in other words, it's even more effective than if you could kill them or hurt them physically. You want to destroy your enemies, you can do it more effectively than putting coals on their head by just giving them water, giving them love, giving them kindness. It's a lot more effective. And so as he wraps up the chapter, do not be overcome by evil, because see, that's what will happen. By us taking vengeance for ourselves away from God, by us not or allowing those to hunger and to suffer because they're our enemies, we are going to be overcome by the very evil that we feel is afflicting us. It then overtakes us. So how do we destroy evil? We do it through goodness. If I was to advise people, if I could talk to America and people would listen to me, I would say, you want to destroy all this hate? Be beautiful and good and kind. It's not about protest. It's not about burning buildings down. It's not about, you know, one person higher than the other, more value, this life or that life. It's about love and care and destroying your enemy by love and care and goodness. And we can overcome it. How do you think God conquered the world with his son? Did he do it by Jesus coming and destroying and striking people down? No. He did it through love. I mean, just stop for a moment and go to the cross and think about that moment where he is hanging on the cross and all the evil. You talk about wanting to take vengeance. You know how he destroyed the world? By showing them love and compassion. By telling his Father to give them a blessing. Forgive them, for they do not understand what they're doing. That should be our prayer for our enemies. And we see the power that that had in changing this world through Christ's example himself. So, one final thought. Love in what God wants is a verb. It's action. You can say you love somebody all day long, but if you're not doing it, it's not love. It's hypocrisy. And that's what we say. We say, well, I love him like a Christian, but I don't really love him. When somebody says things, silly things, we'll say, well, bless their heart, they couldn't help it. That's not really a kind compliment. It's kind of a backhanded way of saying something. But love is action. It's not a noun. It's something that is an action. Love does things. And that's what we have to look at. In this whole kind of wrap-up, I think, I would like to say in this chapter is that, we have to look within. We have to shape ourselves. We have to look at our relationships and how we love one another. And with that, we'll be able to then take that and apply it the way that adversity comes at us. And by being able to understand that God is in charge, he's the one that's going to take care of our enemies, let him handle it, and then we're going to do the opposite. We're going to love people. We're going to show them kindness. And that is going to be our most powerful tool. If you're with us this evening, there's something we can do to help you in your relationship with him. If you're online and there's something we can do to help you in his relationship by becoming a Christian or anything else, you have prayers, we'll be singing this song of invitation. And if you're comfortable, let us know while we sing.